Hi. Hello, everybody. That was a technical. I've had a technical difficulty. I'm back now on a new video. I hope you join me here on this new. I'm carrying on. Um, oh God, how confusing this is. It's a bit distracting. I hope that people are going to come and join me over here now on the next video. Okay. Thank you, Bruce. Great. Okay, I'm back. There were some technical difficulties there. Yeah, I don't know what it was. It just stopped the video, but hopefully the other people will be joining me again. Okay, and I was just about to do Dark Night of the Soul, and so here we go with it. Okay, and some of the lines for this were inspired by you, Bruce. Basically, yeah. Okay. When everything you say gets twisted on the way, taken contrary, and all the things you've done that seemed a lot of fun are so far away. When you haven't got a lot, you're living in a squat, skimming through the bins, paying for your sins, try to find a way. And the world passes you by every time you blink your eye. There goes another day. When you don't know what to do, you haven't got a clue what it's all about. People in your space are so much in your face that you wanna shout. You make a cup of tea when you got a minute free. Flick on the TV and everything you see is full of misery. And all the stuff you see, okay, and all the stuff you hear just covers you with fear and insecurity. When your life is full of doubt, you can't see a way out for your sanity. In the struggle and the fight, you watch the world lose sight of its humanity. And you're wondering why you were born at all, and if God's hiding there behind the wall we call reality. And if he's really there, why the hell am I here in this insanity? On the way to your goal, you'll pass the dark night of the soul, where you'll feel just like a bastard of creation, hanging over the abyss, while the snakes of hell all hiss, snapping as you pray in desperation. That's when you find you've got a friend on whom you can depend, who mysteriously appears as if from nowhere. Though his form you may not see, his presence sets you free, and he shows you the way home and how to go there. Daytime follows night, the shadows with the light start to disappear. The future's looking bright, it's gonna be alright, everything is clear. Now the road lights up as you dance along. You got a sense of purpose and you're feeling strong, full of energy. And then you realize it was angels in disguise come to set you free, set you free, set you free, set you free, set you free. And then you realize it was angels in disguise come to set you free. As daytime follows night, the shadows with the light start to disappear. Jai Bhagawan. Oh, I'm glad I'm back again. Thanks everybody for tuning back. That technical difficulty that I had, I'm not sure what it was. It just happened as these things happen. And so I had to start again. I hope some people come back. Okay. So, just a little recap on the story for those who weren't watching yesterday. And yesterday was a very momentous occasion in the whole story of my life and the lives of thousands of people. And in historically as well, it was the passing of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada on the 14th of November at about 7:25 in 1977. And I described all the events that I was involved with leading up to that. And just change my glasses, sorry. And what happened, what we did in Vrindavan, and the uncertainty now of, we had no idea, this was November, and I mentioned having a little talk with Satsvarup Goswami and Bhakti Charu, and just wanted to know their opinion about what they thought might happen now. And they just said, well, we don't, it's not really clear. There's just going to wait just a few months, and it should all be resolved, and we'll know more around the Mayapur festival. So that was at least 4 months away. So there was this whole period going to happen now, which is a very, very pleasant period and very unusual, because we're all still a bit, Prabhupada had gone, and now what was going to happen? And what it actually meant for me was that I actually started to do this service that I came to India to do. I came for two reasons, really. I wanted to be there because I knew that Prabhupada might not have long to be on the planet, and I wanted to have some personal association, which I managed to have, which I'm so grateful for, and felt blessed to be at that sacred moment when he went into Samadhi in the sacred place of Vrindavana where he wanted to leave his body. And so now it was this kind of period in between worlds. So now what happened was we went back to Bombay, and we got a van, and I think, yes, and then we started to go to Gujerat. We didn't spend long in Bombay. I think we had to fill it up with books and things like that. And in my van, in my group, there was at that time Bahushara, who was from America, was the leader. There was Peter Das from America, and there was Rahugana, a German devotee, and me, and then there was a driver. We actually had a hired driver for the first part of it, because what was going to happen was we went off for a little bit, and then we came back to Bombay later for the opening of the temple. we did this. We went to Bombay, and then we started to travel in Gujarat. We went up to Ahmedabad. If you look at the map, you kind of come up the coast, and Ahmedabad is. There's this little bit sticking out called Zoroastra. It's the part of Gujarat which sticks out like a little lump, and above it, when there's the sea comes in, there's Pakistan on the other side. Really, the Run of Kutch, the Sea of Kutch, and we weren't going to go that far, but we were going to. This was my really after I travelled a bit with Tribhuvannath before, and now I was actually going to go. We were going to go much more off the beaten track in a sense, and see Gujarat. And so we went to Ahmedabad for a day or so, and then we just the first town that was inland was Surendranagar. And it was a lovely, quaint. Gujarati people were very pious, and we had all the names. We just went to the places and we found out different colleges and libraries and different. And during the day, I would be the cook. Actually, I used to cook in the morning. We would have that. We'd have a little arati. We would do our japas and. In all the Gujarati towns, they have these lovely small Krishna temples called Havelis, connected generally with the Pushti Marg. And in other towns, there are also Swami Narayan center temples, which are part of the Swami Narayan sect. And so often I would go off on my japa and I'd just walk through the town in the morning, and I would check out the Havelis, and there would be all these bustling women with their saris and their little plates with their little makanjors going down the streets to do their individual little pujas. It was something I'd never experienced, and it was very beautiful. It was lovely going into the heart of pious Vaishnava traditions in Gujarat. And lots of vegetarians, because there's loads of Vaishnavas and lots of Jains, but it's also known by people who are a bit more modern as it was a bit more of a conservative type of area. And anyway, it was a lovely town. We stayed there for a few days. I went to some schools and colleges, and it was the actually one of the colleges I went to. I'll never forget it. The principal was quite entertaining just to see him because he had a very affected voice. I just remember kind of like coming to his office, and he went, "Hello, so wonderful to meet you." It was just like ridiculously posh and affected, and but he was very charming, and he took an order of books in English and Hindi, and that's something. It was. I thought this is a nice service. You get to meet educated people, sit down. They're very gracious to you. You're presenting wonderful Prabhupada's books. It's all very civilized. There's no hard sell thing going on, and it was great. And then I would also take walks round the town in the morning to go apart from the temples and go to the goshalas, because everywhere in Gujarat they have these incredible goshalas. I'd always find out where they were, and I would just so beautiful in the morning, just to have your eyes to see loads of really well beautiful looked after cows, and there's a smell of the cow dung, and you could just walk everywhere in India, and we had dhotis on, and people were just, and the traditional people who deal with the cows, they have these white turbans on and their clothes, and it's all quite traditional. And I learned this, I don't know if I can do it now, they make a noise, the cow people, like a clicking sound. And I used to go into the goshala, go like that, and all the heads of the cows would turn around like that, like sunflowers in a field. It was quite lovely. I love that. And I started my poster collection at this time because I suddenly realized around these places I loved art, and I had a bit of money, and I was obsessed with old Hindu iconography posters. And so every town we went to, and I started there in Surendranagar, I would find out the poster shops, and I learned this word, Purani picture. Purani means old, as in the Puranas. And they were like, old? They're all at the back in the dust. Nobody wants old. They all want the nice gaudy colours. And I know old Purani pictures. And so I started to and get them incredibly cheap and started to build up my collection. That was something that I got involved with apart from that. And we would meet people. At one part, in Surendranagar, there was an incredible little ashram just outside the town where they did go saver. They had lots of cows, and they had these like sticks, like baseball bats. And they used them for massaging the cows, and the cows would just sit there going, and people would just come and do go say for people from the villages, and they would give milk the cows and give it out free. It was unbelievable. It was wonderful culture, and also we met some people who were very pious, and they wanted to invite us to our houses. You would just walk around. We did one kirtan down the street. We did a couple of kirtans, just the four of us, and they're very pious, and we got invited to one beautiful house. I'll never forget it. It was spotlessly clean, and there was a group of people there, and I think they wanted us to do kirtan, and there was going to be some prasadam. But I was just looking at how it was decorated. They had these shelves all around the side of the walls, and also below those were hanging pots, brass pots, and pots all immaculately clean and shining. And then there was glass jars, and they were filled with grains and ghee and grains and ghee and grains and ghee. And it was just how they'd used kind of natural produce and in a very aesthetic way, and not ostentatious actually either. I thought it was a very beautiful way to kind of like it was a kind of nice expression of showing how their lifestyle was kind of and kind of semi-agrarian, even though they weren't in the fields, but the lifestyle was very much attached to simple living and high thinking and grains and ghee and milk and pots and but beautiful, and I like that. It was always Gujarat was very clean. It's a very nice place to travel around. I'm not going to go into too many details because we went to lots and lots of places. I also discovered a place where you could get these like exactly like I have here, this hangings. I was always attracted to those hangings from even before I joined the Krishna movement, and then suddenly I've discovered that this is where the area where most of these come from in Gujarat. And we came to Bhavnagar, famous town, and right opposite the library there was this shop with huge amounts, and that was really interesting. I bought a few things there. And one of the great places I have to say that we did visit was called Junagadh. And Junagadh, Gujarat's quite kind of boring terrain, most of it, and then suddenly, as you see in the distance, these mountains coming up, and this is what is called was called the Rivataka mountain range in the Krishna book, and Mount Girna, and right at the base is the famous. There's a cave called Muchukunda's cave, which is from the story from the Bhagavad Purana of the great Muchukunda, who was from another yuga, who fought for the Devas and was given a boon. He just wanted to sleep, and he went to sleep. And many years later, Krishna ran from a battlefield, and one of the demons who was fighting, it was a trick of Krishna. He was the guy going, "I'll get you, I'll get you," and Krishna walked into the cave, and as the demon, I think it was Kalyavan, I think it was Kalyavan, and he came into the cave and woke up Muchukunda, and Muchukunda just looked at him and burnt into ashes. Anyway, that was the story. Then Muchukunda had darshan of Krishna, and Muchukunda went back to his heavenly abode. That was there. That was great. And we climbed up that mountain by ourselves. Also, I have to say, one of the great stories while we were in Junagadh, there was a couple of things went on. It was such an interesting place. They had this mountain with these steps going up, these amazing Jain temples up there, and Hindu temples, and the Devi temple on the top. And actually, I have to mention, it was the ashram of Dattatreya. Basically, it was famous. That was named the Juna Akara, a set of Nagababas, ascetics. They're called the Juna Akara because they're based in Junagadh, and their Ishta Devata is Dattatreya. And every year they have a big Shiva Ratri, and my friends Mark and Penny have been going there regularly for the last few years, and they tell me it's very wonderful. And we had a fantastic time just walking up that mountain and early in the morning. We were young in those days. It's a lot of steps, but it's quite a magnificent view and experience. So I highly recommend to anybody who wants a different type of experience in India to go to Junagadh. Um, and what was also I discovered in Junagadh on my poster search was a shop called run by a guy. I can remember all these names. It's incredible. Vasubai, and it was I'd never been in anywhere. It was a bit like a kind of Indian version of Steptoe and Son, and there was things everywhere. And then he had a room, And in the room was a whole area with hundreds and hundreds of posters. It was like Aladdin's cave for me. And I went through them. I just couldn't believe it. I tried to not get too excited. And I had no idea how much he was going to charge me for these things because, and the very famous face pictures by Ravi Varma, some German prints from Edge Bridge Bussy, and all sorts, and ones which I thought were really good and that he had many of. I took a few. I made quite a big pile, and I told him, look, I gave him a little bit of a deposit, and I said, I'll come back with the rest of the money for the others. And that's where I sold my Seiko watch in Junagadh to a doctor who we met selling books, and he'd shown interest in my watch, and I went back there and I made a little bit of a story about how much what we needed some money, and he gave me I think 500 rupees, which was a lot in those days, and the posters were like crazy, like 50 paisa, half a rupee for one. I got a very good deal, so I was very happy. And also, while doing the books there, actually there was a few things that amazing happened there. We met this. I met at one of the schools I went to was a headmaster, and he spoke English, and I was going there to sell some sets of books, and we got into a discussion, as that's what was great about this service. You got to meet very interesting people from the local areas where you go, and we'd heard. Okay, he told us a story. He told me a story then that confirmed something that we had happened just a day before or two. I'll just come back to his story because he's going to tell me a story that's going to confirm this other story. So while me and Peter Das were out in the market one day collecting some ingredients for Nityananda's appearance day back at our hotel, we were staying at a hotel. We came to one of those fancy shops. You have them every town where they have cashew nuts and almonds and dried fruit and nuts, and it's kind of near the other areas. And as we was just sitting there, this wonderful kind of yogi appeared with just a little cloth on, and he had Vaishnava tilak, and he was quite old, but he had incredible posture and elegance. And he came up and he said Jai Shri Krishna, and he said it beautifully, and he spoke English, asked us where we were from, and we there was a seat there, and we sat down, and we just started talking to him, and we asked him, he said he'd been all over the world, and we were like. Right, and we couldn't really imagine. He didn't look like an international kind of yogi like Maharishi or something. And we just said, well, how do you travel? He says, I fly. And we went, right. And we said, like that? He said, yes, just like this, I fly. We didn't really ask much more about this, but we were a bit mystified. And we invited him to our feast the next day, and because he was he was in the Nimbarka lineage, and I'd never met a sadhu in the Nimbarka lineage. There was a bit of a smaller Vaishnava lineage, and also in Gujarat, the prevalent Vaishnava lineage is the Vallabha Sampradaya or the Pushti Marg. So anyway, the next day we'd actually cooked this feast, and we told him what time it was going to be, and we waited for a bit, but he wasn't coming. We didn't think so. We all ate the feast together. It was a wonderful feast, and then all of a sudden we were just sitting and relaxing. There was a knock on the hotel door from the hotel manager, and he said, "Hello, you have some guests?" And we went, "Yes, yes, yes." And first of all, our sadhu came to the door, and then behind him was this other sadhu who he'd brought with him, and that's who I think who the hotel manager was a bit freaked out with, because this guy was primal Baba. He was really much younger, with short but matted hair, covered in ashes, and really stocky, and kind of slightly kind of wild looking eyes and countenance. But they came in, first of all, the Baba came in, and the other Baba just followed him. And when he saw our picture of Gornitai that I had, he just did Dandabats. He said, Dandabats and Gaurangan Mahaprabhu. He was very wonderful. And, we told him we'd save some prasadam for him, and we had just a little bit of a, like introducing him to our other friends. And then we said, oh, who is your a friend who's with you, to the Baba, who was sitting there and kind of eyeing us up. He looked a little bit nervous. He'd obviously was a kind of never been sat down, I don't think, with Westerners before, or like us. And we definitely hadn't. I hadn't anyway seen a sadhu like him. And so the Baba, the Vaishnava Baba said to him something in Hindi, and he had his little joli bag, which all sadhus have, the little bag all sewn up, and he took this images, these photographs wrapped up in plastic and kind of on some board, and he told him, and he showed them to us, and it was kind of really blew our minds. There were these two pictures. One picture of him had a chain around his penis that went through his back, and it was attached to a lorry, and there was a crowd of people around, and he was walking and pulling the lorry with his penis. And the other one was, it wasn't a train, was it? Was it a train? Was it two? God, it was something really, really, really big. I can't even remember if it was a train or not. But both of them were kind of blew our minds. The pictures. He was just sitting there again, just pulling this thing with this massive crowds around, and we were like, "Wow!" And then we said, "Us, kind of, why? What's that for? What does that mean?" And he just said, "To show the power of Shiva." And he didn't say it in English, obviously. He said it in Hindi, and we just went, respect. And when he saw that we kind of were impressed, he kind of lightened up, and he saw that we were impressed by his thing, and that was wow. That was interesting. So thought I'd just relay that story. So now back to the other story with the teacher. So while I was talking to this professor, we'd been discussing ourselves a little bit with, the fact that this Baba had said that he flew places. It was kind of wow. And we'd actually heard stories sometimes from Prabhupada that yogis sometimes, like they can take a bath in the Ganga in a place and go into these different realms and travel long distances and reappear in different places and use mystic channels to teleport themselves and stuff. We'd heard these stories, you hear about them. I think there's things like that also in Autobiography of a Yogi and other books like that, these stories that you hear about and you're not quite sure. Anyway, this professor, very educated chap, in the conversation, I asked him, I said, what is, your philosophy, and he said, at the end of it, he said, I said, what's your conclusion of your spiritual journey? And he said, Krishnas tu Bhagavan Swayam. And that was a verse that I actually knew and a phrase. It's a verse from the Bhagavat that Gaudiya Vaishnavas and worshippers of Krishna really make a thing about, where it describes the different avatars and the fact that according to that verse, Krishna is Swayam Bhagavan, the Supreme Bhagavan. And so that's what he said. And I was like, wow, never heard of anybody outside of ISKCON or other devotees makes such a statement. Excuse me. And so he said, I will tell, and I asked him about his lineage and his path. And I said, I mentioned we'd met this Baba there, the other day, who mentioned something about flying. And what he says, I will tell you a story. Because he looked at me and he said, haha. He said, yes, this place, Junagadh, is a famous place for various yogis and mystics. Many of them, they can leave from this point and fly places and arrive back on certain places. So I was listening attentively, and he said, our guru was from Chitrakoot. It was a different part of India where Ramachandra lived, and he was a Ram Bhakta, and he was very, very, very old. And he said he was like nearly 200 years old or something. And they used to go every year to his ashram to have his darshan, and they would recite Ramayan, and he would just listen to that, and that was a kind of a ritual they did every year. And then he said that one year the teacher said, "Don't come next year. I will come to you." And they were like, how's he going to do that, and everything. And he told them where to go and where to be to meet him. So he said, this is his story, he said that they went to this one place where he told them in this kind of clearing, and maybe in the jungle, because there's lots of forests and jungle and different places there around Junagadh. And they said they got there at the time, and then they suddenly did, and this guru, which I kind of like suddenly arrived from the air and landed there. I mean, it's hard to kind of get your head around that, but he was so convinced, and that's the story he told me, and I just went, yes, why not? I mean, my goodness. I don't know. People, he said that that's what he experienced. So anyway, that was another little story from there. Anyway, then we went to Dwarka. We went to so many places. We had a great time. And Rajkot, we travelled all around the different towns. And then we had to go. We had to go back to Bombay for the opening, the end of January. That was it. And there'd been some strange incidents happening in Bombay with an American devotee who got involved with a Bollywood star, and Karunda, who had been got involved, come to Bombay, had been knifed. And somebody told us about us. It was in the newspaper, and we were like, "Oh my goodness, what's been going on?" It never really got clarified to me what that whole story was about. It was some devotee that had kind of moved off into the fringes and got married to somebody and taken too many weird things and got involved in magic and lost the plot. Basically, that's what I found out was the kind of behind the story. Anyway, strange things happen in life. And this was a massive thing, this opening in Bombay. It was so big that even I think Newsweek and Time magazine were coming to even cover it because it was a big story. It was such a shame that Prabhupada wasn't there to witness it, but they had spent a long time, big effort to get it all ready, and there was a whole group of South Indian Brahmins who had been involved with the installation of the Hyderabad temple that came very impressive with their big seekers and tilak and their jewelry, and they're doing all the mantras, and especially they wanted, because there was a big South Indian connection in Bombay, and they wanted to show that the temple was kind of authentic. They didn't, there wasn't that many foreign devotees at that time. What was interesting, I noticed, was as soon as the building started to get more and more complete, all these people suddenly being Indian devotees that came, because this is what actually you found out in India. As soon as ISKCON started making all of the temples, for Westerners to kind of live in ashrams and live this kind of a simple-ish life, it was an austerity and a move away from comfortable kind of like bourgeois existence. But for many Indians, this was a real step up from where they had been in their social conditions, and they kind of, there's lots of things that need to be done that doesn't really you don't need to be specifically intellectual or a great philosopher. You just need to be able to clean floors and do manual work. And I suddenly noticed all these new chaps around, and they're all in white cloth. And one day I questioned one of them about just basic things. He didn't know who Prabhupada was. He didn't know any of the history. He didn't know anything. He was just Hare Krishna. He was just there to, it was a few meals a day. All you had to do was do what they tell you to do. And there was lots of these types joining the temple around that time to do all the things that needed to be done. Nothing wrong with that. But I just noticed that's what was happening. It was a very different kind of story than people in the West, and why they came to the Krishna movement, even though quite a few people come to the Krishna movement in moments of distress, not denying that. But generally not for upward mobility. Generally not for upward mobility, but in this case it was. And it was a massive event. Me and Chanarari were put in charge of providing snacks and stuff. There was a library behind the theatre where it was a media room. They were going to look after the media people that were coming and provide snacks. And so we went off to Santa Cruz, and we got stocked up with lots of snacky things and crunchy things and peanuts and dried fruit, and we had all these different things, this array, and I think not sure what kind of drinks we had provided, but that was our service on that day. And I think the festival went over for a couple of days, and they had these massive pots that they were cooking outside. Certain areas were cordoned off, and they had an area right outside the front entrance, which was amazing canopy, very opulent, with white sheets everywhere and big rolls and silk hanging down. And this was the place for all the rich life members, which there were many, many of in Bombay. Bombay was the financial capital of India, and a lot of wealth was there. Prabhupada had felt quite happy in Bombay. It was like considered like his office, and he used to go on these walks. When you go on the walk in the morning in the Juhu beach, just there, you see all these kind of middle class, upper middle class Indians in their whites, all walking down the beach, all chatting, and it's part of the culture. And many of them are very pious. There's quite a few temples there in Bombay, and they have this big Ganesh festival every year. It's a mixture really of Konkani, Maharashtrian, and Gujarati people, big lots of and Parsi community in Bombay. And well, the festival, it was a big festival. I remember Prabhudas Patwari came and gave a talk. He was the chief minister, I think, of Madhya Pradesh. Maharashtra, sorry. Sumati Maraji was there, the lady who had given Prabhupada free passage on the Scindia shipping line on the boat, the Jaladuta, that brought Prabhupada to the West. She actually just lived close by there in Juhu. And there were speeches and talks given, and it was a big affair. And Hari Om Sharan came and sung bhajans on the stage in the amphitheatre, the auditorium, sorry, and the amphitheatre. And Vaijanti Mala did some beautiful classical dance. And it was a glorious, it was a very kind of lovely festival. And as soon as it was finished, we went off again on our back to Gujerat and carried on doing our service. And this time, though, we didn't have an Indian driver. We actually had, I think Rahugana did all the driving. And at a certain point while we were in Gujarat, Chanarari, my good friend, joined our party. And then it came to the point where we were finishing and it was time to head towards Mayapur for the festival. And we had to, there was a few problems with tires on the van and it was going to be a long journey, so we had to make sure that the van was all had kind of been looked at, the engines, the tires were good. And Chanarari said to me, why don't we go up to Nathdwara for a couple of days? And I said, Nathdwara. And then he started to talk about the pictures and the artists. And I went, oh, Nathdwara, that's the Nathdwara that on the posters that I've been seeing for years, Narottam Narayan specifically. And he said, okay. And it wasn't too far away from Ahmedabad on the bus. It was near Udaipur. It was, quite a way, but there was a few days to spare. So me and Chanarari jumped on a really, local bus, went up to Nathdwara and had darshan of Srinathji. I won't get into all the beautiful stories behind Srinathji, but has his origins at Govardhan Hill, connected in our lineage with Madhavendra Puri, the guru of Ishwara Puri, who was the guru of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But a few hundred years before, like many of the deities in Vrindavan, they'd come to Rajasthan for protection under Hindu kings. And anyway, there's a story how Srinathji came there. And some people call it a Gupta Vrindavan. It's a bit like Vrindavan, but not many temples, just the one main temple. And it's done in this form, the Vallabha Sampradaya, all of their temples are like havalis, in the mood of Nanda Maharaj's big house, who's the king of the cowherds. It's a kind of a rustic palace vibe, but quite big. And all the town is painted white, and there's lots of art. There's a big artist tradition there. So we checked into a little room, and Chanarari had been there already. He'd been traveling, and he kind of knew we went to the same place. But there was, this. And I was really excited, and so when we'd had darshan, I asked some people. I said, "Where is Nai Haveli? I want to meet Narottam Narayan." And everybody knew who Narottam Narayan was. And they said, "You just go down here, down there, go down this road. There's a square with a tree. Go a little bit further, and there's Nai Haveli, and you ask somebody down there." So that's what we did. And I got to a corner and there was somebody there, and I was looking and I said, Narottam Narayan? And he said, yes, there. And he was looking at me like, wow, foreign, come to see Narottam. And I had no idea what to expect. I've been looking at his paintings since I first joined in Amsterdam. And it's true that his image that he's painted of Moli Manohar, that was published in the 30s by SS Brijbasi and Son when they were based in Karachi, is most probably one of the most popular images in India ever to be printed, much like Maxfield Parris's famous print in the West is one of the most. So in India, this image, and I had no idea because he'd done so many paintings that I've seen of his, and it was done in this rich kind of oil color style, especially if you saw the old prints. So this chap on the corner, he looked up, Ganaradam, or whatever he said, and first of all, this lady put her head out with a sari, typical Rajasthani, couldn't even see the eyes, covered in bangles, old lady. Ah, well done, you know. And then he just said, foreigners here, some Videshis. And then she went out, and then this other head popped out, and there was this very humble looking gentleman with a little puggree turban on his head, with a little moustache, very small. And he looked and he smiled and he said something. And the next thing you know, his wife had come down the stairs, opened the doors. I'd come across with this chap who was very kindly offered to be my interpreter. I think they're all related. They're all Sharmas somehow or other. And he came up and then I explained to him who I was, that I'd been a fan of his for years. And I come all the way from England to meet him and to come here. And he looked at me like, wow, he couldn't really, no one had ever really come to see him from the West and talked to him and acknowledged him. And he was just so kind of blown away. And his wife brought in some snacks and some hot milk and some biscuits. And we sat there talking. And I was just sitting there and I had the interpreter. And he showed me this picture he was working on. He was in his 80s. And he mentioned, he said, my eyesight is beginning to go. Now my cataracts are beginning. I'm not quite as good as I used to be. And he had this picture, it was about this big. And it was of Gayatri Devi with 5 different heads sitting on a lotus flower with beautiful water and that beautiful style. And it was in watercolor. And just to see it in real life, it was... And I actually had some of my pictures that I collected with me. And I opened them and showed them, and he was like amazed. He said, "You've got more of my pictures than I have in my collection." And there was one picture that he had up there, and I noticed. I said, I kind of recognised that landscape there, and it was only about this big. And I said, "That's the picture, isn't it, with the Krishna in the boat with?" And he said, "Yeah." And he was happy that I actually understood, and he could see that I knew his work. And he had did this famous. There's this famous picture of this boat with Krishna playing his flute, one gopi in the water and the other gopis in the boat. And there's a gorgeous moonlight and the reflection and the way it's done. It's very captivating. And there was this little sketch of that, and it was all in green pointillism, like a sketch. And he said that he'd actually gone out in the moonlight, and then he'd either taken some sketches, and he'd done this sketch afterwards with paint made from grass. He'd made a kind of a paint from green grass, chlorophyll, and he'd done this pointillism thing. In their tradition, in the Nathdwara miniature tradition, they make all of their paints by hand from minerals, and the way they do the gold leafing, quite a few foreign students from around the world went there and studied from the different artists who live in Nai Haveli, like Reva Shankar Sharma, Dwakalal Jangid. There was quite a few other famous artists, but I would go back later to meet Narottam Narayan, but it was enough just to kind of meet him there. That was absolutely wonderful. And so that was a big thing for me. Me and Chanarari returned back to Ahmedabad, and our little group, we headed on into unknown waters across India. And later on, in a few years' time, I will do it again. But this was the first time I was doing it was kind of right from the western side of India, right over to the eastern side, through the middle part, not the north. So it was never I've seen a little bit of the north so far, but hadn't been in this part. So it was intriguing for us. And we didn't really know what to expect. We had our tyres fixed and everything, and we went off on our way. And it was a lot of journey and a lot of travelling. And some of the devotees, they took it in turns for driving, and because it was a lot, we wanted to do cover as much ground as possible. And one place we came at night that was pretty freaky. There was a bunch of in the middle of nowhere. There was a whole bunch of tribals out in the middle of nowhere, and they had a kind of a branch thing across the road. to try and stop the vans. We didn't know, and we just kind of went, "Meow," and they just ran away, and we just went through. But we went really fast because we didn't know what was ahead. Anything could have been there. Anyway, we arrived in Puri, and I think maybe Bahushara had been there in Puri before, but none of us had been there. And we knew that where we needed to go to, there was a devotee, an Assamese devotee, I think Niskinchana his name was, and he was at the Gaudiya Math on the main road in Puri, where Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was born, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur had been a judge, a magistrate in Puri in his day, and around 1878, I think, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was born as Bimala Prasad there, and the Gaudiya Math had made a temple. So we went there, and in those days, there was much, much less tourism than there is now. There was hardly any hotels or anything like that. There was just some very, very basic dharmshalas, and we got lodging in one dharmshala, and we got shown around Puri. We weren't allowed to have darshan in the main temple because foreigners aren't allowed. But I think what was wonderful was I had my first Jagannath Mahaprasada, and for anybody who goes to Puri and has that Jagannath Mahaprasad, they will never forget it because it was the first time I ever really loved dal. I'd never really got dal until I had the Puri dal, the thick dal. It's all in these clay pots, and we had plates of sabjis and sweets, these malpuras and different chutneys, and it was divine. And we got to see the major places of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's house, the Gambhir, Siddhabakul. You may have seen I sometimes wear a mala, and those beads are from from the Siddhabakul tree. It's a bakul tree considered a siddha, and it's a Mahaprabhu planted a seed there. It turned into a tree to give shade for Haridas, who was from Javan Haridas, who was born into a Muslim family and wasn't allowed to go into the Puri temple. So he was instructed to sit there, chant the name, which he did. He was called Namacharya, and to have darshan by looking at the chakra on the top of the temple. So that tree is still there, and I managed to get a branch and got it made into malas from the Baba who was there. So we went there, and a story was told to us. We started to talk because I hadn't had much encounter with any Gaudiya Math devotees or places. It was all quite new, and he was very, very nice. In fact, this devotee, had wanted to join ISKCON because he was educated and he'd written to Prabhupada, but Prabhupada had said, "No, you follow your Guru Maharaj, who was his god brother." I can't remember exactly. It may have been Madhav Maharaj, maybe not. And he said, "But please, if my disciples come to Puri, please can you help them and show them around?" So that's what he said. So this was his service, and he had this close connection with Prabhupada, and so he got his kind of connection with the international Vaishnava community. And he told us the story about Krishna's Babaji, who I just recently seen a few months before when Prabhupada had passed, because he'd really struck me as somebody very, very special. So he relayed to us an anecdote that was quite well known amongst Gaudiya Math and some ISKCON devotees, but I'd never heard it for the first time. I think Bahushra heard it, but he listened, and the story was that Krishnadas Babaji, he used to do lots of mantras, japa, and he went on what was called a Purushcharan, which is a very specific vow for a specific amount of time, involving hardly eating at all and doing thousands and thousands of names of Krishna. And it went on for days and days, and the Vaishnavas were a bit concerned about his health because he was, quite weak, and it was fasting so extremely. It's not something generally that Vaishnavas do a lot of, extreme fasting, but he was a Babaji and he was doing his thing. And so what they did was they apparently, this is the story goes, they got a doctor to come just to see if give him a checkup to see how he is. And the doctor apparently came, offered his respects, and got his stethoscope, and he put it to his heart. Had his heart, to Babaji's heart, and he heard the Maha Mantra coming through the stethoscope from his heart, and he just fell down on the floor. And so either Bahushara told us after this story, he said, yes, yeah, I heard that story, and I heard that that story went to Prabhupada, and when Prabhupada heard that, he said, yes, that is Paramahamsa. So that is what Prabhupada was letting us know, that there were some devotees who really were Uttama Bhagavats, very advanced, but they seemed like they were few and far between. But he specifically had been told by Prabhupada to let us know. Anyway, so that we just heard that story. So then we came to Calcutta. I think we spent half a day there and went straight to Mayapur. Now, I hadn't been to Mayapur. This is 77. I hadn't been since 76. And during this time, they had built this long building that was called the Long Building. And apparently it was the longest building in Bengal at that time. And because ISKCON has expanded and expanded, and so many devotees were coming and pilgrims, but this was mostly all for devotees. And so we got our accommodation. And so it was like we all got together, got settled, and then there was a meeting held with all the members of the library party. And there was quite a few of us, and quite a few I hadn't actually seen. And so the big discussion was this. Prabhupada had passed. Gargamuni had disappeared, who had been in charge of the library party. He'd set it all up. And now there was it was up for grabs in terms of the management, who was going to take it up. And guess who was the person that had his beady eyes on the library party to Tamal Krishna? And the other contender was Swarup Damodar, who everybody in the library party really liked, because he was humble. He was from Manipur. He was of Indian origins, and he was a Vaishnava by roots, his tradition, and he was a member, not only that, of the Bhaktivedanta, head of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, along with Sadaputa. Very prestigious and position to be in, and they were involved with writing books and trying to kind of present Vaishnavism and Bhakti to the scientific paradigm. So he was much more to our choice. He was a very nice chap, really. So we all kind of sat and said, yeah, we want Swarup Damodar, we don't want Tamal. The only thing was that Abhinandan, who was chosen as our spokesman and had been in India a year or two, and he was one of the leading members in the library party, he was a bit, he knew, he'd spoken with Tamal, and he knew that Tamal was really eager. But we kind of sent him on this mission to go over to see Tamal and tell him that we had decided that we really preferred to go with Swarup Damodar. So across from where we were, and the Long Building, was the Lotus Building, which I mentioned before was the only other big building there. That's where the temple is, on the ground floor. Prabhupada had his rooms up next floor, and then there was a few other floors. And it was generally, now, of course, it was going to be where the big shots were going to have their rooms up there. And Tamal had his rooms. And there were these steps that you went up onto the floor. And we were kind of sitting, wondering what was going to happen. He went over, and we could hear Tamal's voice shouting from across there. It was so loud, and we didn't even hear exactly what it was, but we could hear the volume of it. I don't even know if Abhinandan got into the room, or he was maybe at the door when this happened. He may have just even started to say what had happened, and he came back kind of with his head down and crestfallen to tell us the news that we'd kind of gathered, the bad news. He said, Tamal, he's really, he wants it, he's gonna have it, there's nothing we can do about it. He's kind of, and we all sank into a kind of despondency, really, not really knowing what to think. Now, at that time also, Vimukta Sangha, my dear friend, was there in Amsterdam, and while I'd gone Lochanananda, who'd been the temple president from 75 to 77, had left. It hadn't really been made clear exactly why he had left Amsterdam, but somehow or other he had left, gone back to Paris, I think, or maybe gone to America. I'm not sure. And Vimukta Sangha, my friend, had taken over as the temple president. And so it was a whole. I'd been away out of on this story. I'd left in September, and now this was coming. This was coming in end of February to March. I'd been away in this other world, and but for Muktasanga, he could see the writing on the wall, and he was saying, "You don't want to be with Tamal Krishna. Come back to Amsterdam. You can, I'll make, give you some facilities there." And he said, we've got this room at the top, and you can maybe stay there, and all sorts of things. And I was considering it because I was just thinking, I can't go back to that kind of. I'd enjoyed a bit of freedom, with the library party and this small party, staying in little places, and I really wanted to stay in India. I didn't really want to go back, but there was this spanner in the works now. So on, okay, I think that what happened in terms of the chronology is that there was the Gaur Purnim was coming, the full moon, and that year we knew it was going to be an eclipse in the evening, very much similar to what happened when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was born on that day. He was born on February the 28th, I think, 1896. It changes every year because it's a lunar calendar, and nobody really knew this whole kind of this question that I'd had in Vrindavan, and like, well, what's going to happen now? Nobody really knew what was going to happen at all. Then all of a sudden, all of a sudden, I think it was Gaur Purnima Day. I might be wrong, but it was suddenly there was the Guru Puja in the morning, and we all went over, and there was this spectacle. It wasn't, there's Prabhupada's Vyasasam was in the centre, and then there were the other chairs, like in a horseshoe coming around Prabhupada, little seats that had been made for the new gurus. So, leading up to, I mentioned before Prabhupada passing, the whole process of initiation had been delegated to the leaders who were already doing the sacrifices, but they were doing it without having to ask Prabhupada. And there was a kind of a term used for it called Ritvik, meaning officiating priests. But to tell you the truth, at that time, none of us had been really concerned about all this terminology and different things. We were just kind of curious to kind of know how this was all going to happen and what was going to happen in this new stage. And then, as this Guru Puja started, it was most probably first to Prabhupada, and then all of the potential new disciples or people connected with the new gurus all kind of stood in front of their potential new gurus, and there was this multiple Guru Puja done to all of them. Now, this divided quite a lot. Most of the majority of devotees were all around, kind of like, "Wow, great! This is it! The new world, all the new gurus." And then there was a few of us that were like, "What is going on?" And I kind of removed myself a little bit from this, right over to another entrance, which was nearer to where the deities were, because the temple was orientated. The deities were at the east side, Prabhupada's Vyasasam was at the west side, and then the other exits were at the north and south sides. And then there was this lattice kind of work around the side where light came in, all around the temple. It was marble, and while this was going on, what happens is at Gaur Purnima, all the different Gaudiya mutts have their deities of Gaur Nitai that they take around on palanquins, and they have Naga Kirtans down the streets. They're all celebrating Holy Well, and they go down the main Bhaktisiddhanta, go into the different temples, do Kirtans, go in and out, and it's a very celebratory type of thing. All the different Vaishnava branches of the Gaudiya, generally the Gaudiya Mutt branches and ISKCON are there during that time. And just while this is happening, the timing is just amazing. Suddenly we hear this noise. a big kirtan coming into the temple, and there's a whole bunch of Gaudiya Math devotees with their deities on their in a palanquin. And just as while this is happening and coming in, and I'm watching this whole thing, there's that going on, I noticed Pradyumna Panditji suddenly appear at the door there, and he was looking at the whole everything, that arti, saw the Gaudiya Math, and then within the Gaudiya Math there was some kind of something uh, there was some pranams done, and then I saw coming out from the kirtan party was Krishna's Babaji, who was kind of hiding just in the group, and he just went away because he knew Pradyumna because he'd met him with Prabhupada, and he came over to Pradyumna, and they were kind of Pradyumna, I think, went down and he was offering pranams, and as soon as I saw this, and another devotee, we just ran right over there to where Krishna's Babaji was, and we both went down to try and touch his feet to get his blessings and to offer our respects. And as soon as he saw us like this, he jumped away from us and he went, Hare Krishna, and ran away. And we kind of, it was, so you can see the, here was a genuine Paramahamsa, great elevated Vaishnava, keeping very humbly in a group of kirtaniers, not, and when he was, not expecting praise or looking for praise or worship of any kind, and there we were trying to offer respects, and he was freaking out with that being offered to him, because that's something that Vaishnavas don't really they don't want to be respect, they want to be humble. That is the nature of, it's one of the great famous qualities of pure Vaishnavas. And there on the other side was the spectacle of and I don't, sorry if I offend anybody who might be connected with one of these people, but I'm sorry, none of them were Uttama Adhikaris, and they were quite neophyte, and somehow or other they had taken upon themselves to put them on these seats and become gurus, whatever that meant at this moment. Nobody was really clear, and definitely Panditji, Pradyumna, looked very, very, very concerned, and so were we. So that was the irony and of that scenario that was going on there, and I'll tell you the other what was going to happen next, because and then I'll give you my kind of judgment and my commentary on it. Because I think later that evening, if this was actually on the Gaur Purnima day, as I remember it, that evening there was a meeting called to Bhavananda's room to meet Tamal Krishna. Now, on the top of this lotus building, up the top, the two resident sannyasis who spent most of their time in Mayapur developing the project was Jaipataka, who'd been there right from the beginning, and Bhavananda, who'd been there for a while. And they had their rooms on the top. We were told that there was going to be a meeting in the evening, and that evening there was going to be a big bath in the Ganga during the solar eclipse. It was a massive big thing. All the devotees were going to go down to the Ganga and take their bath, because that's what you do during an eclipse, and it's a very sacred thing, and great remembrance of Mahaprabhu on the Gaur Purnima, the most sacred day of the whole Vaishnava, the Gaudiya Vaishnava calendar, devotee calendar. So we went up to the room early evening, into this room, and there was Bhavananda, Tamal Krishna, and Adikeshava. And Bhavananda, we all came into the room, quite a lot of us, and there was maybe a few other henchmen that they had in their gang over there. Maybe Satadanya was there, I'm not really sure. So Bhavananda started his talk. He was, if anybody had ever seen, he was big. He got power because he was a drama queen, basically, a big drama queen, and he had this voice, and he would be he's very fearful, kind of quite frightening type of person. In fact, Tamal was in his different way as well. So Bhavananda went on. He started to introduce how wonderful it was that who Tamal Krishna was, and what a great devotee he was, and then he started to say, and you chaps have been poisoned by Gargamuni. who's left the movement, and somehow or other you've been poisoned, and this is a great offence that you are not accepting Tamal Krishna to be in charge. He was very dear to Prabhupada. He was his secretary up to the last moment. He's, and how dare you? And he's led this whole kind of thing. And then he got then he got Adikeshava. But during this time, kind of Tamal Krishna wasn't really saying anything. He was letting them say it all. And Adikeshava, who was this really quite geeky looking guy from New York, and there's some dodgy stories about him and his father and the CIA that I'm not going to mention too much about, just to give you a clue. And he came and just kind of reiterated what Bhavananda did, but with a bit more kind of like, and then he started to look at certain devotees, and it was the same tactic that Pritu had used in Amsterdam with Jagadev and the other devotees, pointing them out. And we know about you. You're one of these types, aren't you? You do this and this, and you're independent, and all of you, and they started. And I was looking at Mahaman, who was a very reasonable Indian devotee, educated, and we're all looking at each other going, there were people, some devotees were, the expression was, what are we being, what's happening here? We're being offended and told we're this and we're that. And right there, while this was going on in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm out of here. And there's no way I'm going to be under this kind of type of vibe. And then, so then Tamal Krishna kind of came on quite mild and said, yes, this is it. I'm in charge. This is going to be the new way. And it kind of, and if you don't like it, tough, really. That was it. And we all went out of the room, and I was just livid. Many devotees were livid, and I think many devotees at that moment said, I am leaving immediately the library party. So what he had done was he had this was the initial kind of taste of what was to come, and the attitude of some of the leaders of the Krishna movement. And I remember trying to, when we all kind of, the whole mood of going down to the Ganga and taking that bath wasn't really full of jubilation so much, but I do remember Vimukta Sangha had been lurking around, waiting for them to hear the result of the meeting. And as soon as it was finished, we met up, and I said, I'm coming, and he says, I knew you would, and great, and he was so happy, and I actually just thought, okay, I've got somewhere to go, and I'm going somewhere where I wanted. I was glad I had my escape route planned. Different devotees did all sorts of different things, but it decimated the library party. It never fully recovered. And this was just the kind of like the beginning of the end of many, for many people's involvement in the Krishna movement, because what was going to happen next, I'm going to describe in my next talk, which is like, well, what did it mean then? These guys being guru. What was this new? How was this going to affect? And I was going back to Amsterdam, and I had quite a good friendship with Bhagavan, and so he was going to become the guru over there, but we didn't really know much about that. But we will talk about that in the next share, which will most probably be tomorrow, and if not the next day. Um, Yes, this is like the kind of it's such an important historical precedent what happened here, because basically everything that's followed from this has affected the lives of thousands of people. It's affected the way the Krishna movement has developed, and we will follow the details so you get a little bit of an idea of the transformative power of power itself, and what it can do to people, and how twisted things can become due to the infiltration of negativity and kind of, well, I'm going to start with the theme as well now, is that Prabhupada had actually mentioned in his books a term called Kali Chela. It doesn't mean the goddess Kali. It means a Chela means a disciple of the age of Kali, the age of hypocrisy and confusion, and where everything that appears to be one way is actually the other way. Everything is upside down. And it was a term that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had coined to describe people that looked like the Vaishnavas. They had the whole look. They had the tila, the kantimala, they dressed it. They could mostly give the talks and everything, and they had the social thing down. But actually, they were into it for ulterior reasons. Now, it's interesting because just today I was reading in a discussion, funnily enough, with Prabhupada and Tamal Krishna, and Prabhupada was explaining actually what happened in the Gaudiya Math. He was quite blatant, you know. So, I hope nobody criticizes me for criticizing, because this is exactly what Prabhupada did about, calling a spade a spade. And he said that basically he believed, and this is why I read it, that Kunja Baba, the very famous person, Bhakti Vilas Tirtha, who was one of the main movers in the whole kind of Gaudiya Math, had actually he was in it for his own prestige, and he was actually the Prabhupada used the terms. He said he was using Bhaktisiddhanta as the front person, and behind the scenes he was taking loads of money and manipulating things. Prabhupada actually used those. I actually read it, today, and so Prabhupada was that blatant about what had happened to his guru's organization, and so this is going to be a story about what has happened to my guru's organization that I was a part of, something that I gave up my life, like many thousands of devotees. We sacrificed our lives for the mission of Mahaprabhu, due to Prabhupada's charisma and spiritual potency in introducing the culture. And now this whole thing was turning into something else. In fact, what I see a lot of comparisons with what's happening now with the great mythological stories, or the great itihasyas, which are Mahabharata and Ramayana. And both of them, one of the major things that happens in there is a kind of a quirk. It seems like a quirk of destiny. Really not a positive one. In the Mahabharata, well, let's start with the Ramayana. In the Ramayana, there's Kaikeyi, who was the mother of Bharat, one of the sons of Dasarat. She had some evil motives, and she actually wanted her son to be the king, not Ram, who was the rightful king. So she poisoned the mind of King Dasarat, and made him remember this promise that he'd made to her earlier, that because she'd helped him a lot, and she said, "You've got to give me this one boon," and that led to the exile of Ram, and then Lakshman and Sita. This exile, I think it's very important, the exile part of this story, and that's the whole part central story with what happened after that. That's part of the whole story of the Ramayana. In the Mahabharata, you have the families, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and the family feud, and the crucial thing that changes the kind of destiny with it all and leads up to the Mahabharata war is the game of dice, where Yudhisthira and the Pandavas are cheated in a game of dice out of their kingdom ultimately, and they have to go on exile eventually as well, and go through all sorts of unusual, strange adventures. And so we're talking about God himself, and we're talking about incarnations of gods who then come on earth to help with Krishna's Leela. They have to go off and go into this exile. So this is kind of what I see this ritual that happened with the gurus taking over ISKCON, this organization, the family. We're all a big family, and now there was one group within the family that were going to create a situation which was going to cause the majority of their god brothers, their siblings, to leave, and some people even, and anyway, I'm not going to get into that story quite yet, but I thought I'd mention that now, because it was a very we've actually talked about the actual act of the deed, and so that's how I see it. Okay, well, look, thank you very, very much. I don't think I'm going to do any more songs because I've spoken a lot today, but thank you very much for tuning in, following this story. Share it with people who you think might want to hear this story because they've never actually heard it. And it's also based on the initial part of my story was What's in a name? How did I get my name? And I give the analogy of kind of going on a train in India. Someone says, "What is your good name?" I go, "Maturadas," and they go, "Oh, how did you got that? How did you get that?" So a lot of the story was about how I got the name, and then they ask, "Well, are you still with the Hare Krishna movement?" And I go, "No, I left it quite a few years ago." Why? So this whole part of this story is about why. So I've described about going along with the Krishna story with the getting the name Maturadas, and now the part of the story about why I left the Hare Krishna movement and went freelance is going to be contained in this next section of the story. So please tune in. And I'm sure there's quite a few of you out there that have been through this similar journey yourselves, so you'll relate it. And it was wonderful yesterday getting Ravi mentioning how, for me, in that story with Prabhupada's passing, that the scene which I got became very emotional describing with Pishima and Prabhupada, he saw that as well. That was incredibly significant. And how many devotees were there and witnessed these incredible these sights, this leela of our guru. So I actually do believe that this whole Krishna story that we're involved with is an extension, strangely enough, of Gauranga's leela. That he set apart. Then he had the next generation, and the next generation he went through its story, and then the Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta, Prabhupada, and then it suddenly goes on this massive matrix internationally. And I believe that lots of us, we're all part of an extension of this story. So we all have our different roles to play, and whatever you're doing, wherever you are, whatever you're going through, whatever the world is throwing at you, uh, don't panic, stay calm, keep a sense of equilibrium, and preserve your spiritual autonomy. I say that every time. Big hugs to you all. Hari Om.